So as we are now only about 3 weeks away from the release of The Batman, the marketing has been significantly ramped up. All the movie magazines are doing more and more articles, and this month, about a week ago I believe, Total Film, which I think is a British magazine, released a lovely edition of their February issue, and it has 18 pages about the Batman. So today I thought we'd go over all the new information we've been given regarding the villains of the Batman movie, as all of the actors, I think, have been interviewed, so there's some really cool bits of information. We'll cover the Riddler, Carmine Falcone, Catwoman, Penguin, and more. So let's get into it. So let's start with a small interview with Colin Farrell, who plays Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin. So Total Film asks, how does Oswald fit into Matt Reeves' vision of Gotham? And Colin Farrell says, I think, from what I read, every single character in Matt's Gotham is broken. Every character has some internal fracture of struggle that is striving for repair in a variety of ways. Oz certainly has his share of ghosts. Now, I think from pretty much every trailer we've had so far, it's quite obvious that all these characters within this version of the Bat Universe are very damaged and broken people. And it seems as though they've even taken that quite literally by scarring each individual character, which is something that I've talked about before. You can see the scars on Bruce. You can see that Andy Serkis's Alfred has a scar. You can see that Oswald Cobblepot is very disfigured and scarred. And they obviously still haven't shown us a clear shot of Edward Nashton. So we only see the Riddler wearing a mask. So I have theorized in the past that perhaps he is very disfigured as well. So the next question is, how did he get the Penguin nickname? Colin Farrell says he's got some physical issues that left him with a severe limp. He doesn't take kindly to the name. It's something more whispered behind his back. For now, maybe he embodies it at some later stage. So quite interestingly, as we've seen with other versions of Penguin, let's take the Gotham version for example, the Penguin nickname starts off as sort of a derogative insult to Oswald Cobblepot, and it's something that I imagine at some point, perhaps in the second or third movie, he will embrace and make his sort of crime boss title. How was the look of the character developed? Matt had a clear idea about the silhouette of the man, but I gotta give massive props to the artistic brilliance of Mike Marino, who designed the face. It felt like Mike created this amazing marionette and asked me to help inhabit/animate it. I had no idea we were going to travel this route, but once we agreed on it, I got very excited. Then I saw the design on a computer screen and I got even more excited. Then when we did a makeup test, I just felt so fortunate to be able to play in such a sandbox. As everyone knows, this Penguin looks absolutely nothing like Colin Farrell. Even when you know it's him, it's hard to see any form of resemblance. The world of makeup and special effects is just unreal these days, and I for one am very excited to see what he brings to the table. Next up, we have an interview with Paul Dano, aka Edward Nashton, the Riddler. What can you say about the Riddler? Matt was bringing something real to this. It's part of what's scary about it. I know some of his references are like the Zodiac Killer. For me, that was a small part of it. I think that this character's intent is far greater than somebody like that. So I think what we can take away from this answer is that the Riddler in this story is not just some common killer, some common serial killer. He's got bigger goals, bigger intentions, and probably actually wants to make a difference that are in line with his aims. Being such a different take, could you draw any inspiration from the comics? I certainly read a lot of the comics, but really for fun and to soak up any vibrations one can. Certainly there were inspirations for Matt, just in essence, in soul or tone, but there's nothing that's head-on in terms of this character. It was more about breathing in Gotham and the lore. So again, although it's very clear that this take on the Riddler is very different to what we are used to seeing in comic books, it's good to know that the cast and the crew were still reading as much comics as they can to kind of, in the words of Paul Dano, soak up the lore. Now, this next one isn't really a villain, but it's a small interview with Andy Serkis on his portrayal as Alfred, and I thought it would be fun to include that as well. Was this a completely different experience to working on the APES movies with Matt? It was a completely different experience in the sense that the characters couldn't be further apart. But in terms of working with this amazing filmmaker, he's just one of the great storytellers in terms of character, emotional content, and blending all that with a visual sensibility. Again, if you guys haven't seen the Planet of the Apes movies directed by Matt Reeves, you should definitely go and check them out. They are phenomenal, and it will really give you a good sense of just how much of a talented filmmaker and storyteller he is. How involved is Alfred with helping Bruce be Batman at this point in the story? He's watching, and he's still trying to hold on to him, to try to stop him from disappearing down a rabbit hole at this point. I think he believes that he's dangerous to himself, and it isn't particularly well formed as an idea. He can see that he's heading towards trouble. This kind of just backs up what we've heard in the past about the relationship between Bruce and Alfred at this point. We know that it's very strained. We know that they're not that sort of father-son relationship that we're used to seeing. It's more of a guide, but a guide that's not wanted. Batman wants to do his own thing, Bruce wants to do his own thing, become the Batman, and Alfred just seeing it as Bruce losing his mind. And doing it that way leads me to being very excited that they might create a storyline out of those two rebuilding a relationship, becoming the bond, the friendship, the father-son relationship that we're used to seeing. I think that will make a really nice sort of side story and an overarching process of what could potentially be a trilogy. What does Robert Pattinson bring to the role of Batman and Bruce Wayne? I think Rob's amazing as Bruce and as Batman. He has this incredible range which allows him to play the vulnerability and the insularity of the character. He manages that so beautifully and subtly. And then when he goes into the guise of Batman, he's incredibly tough and brutal. It's a Jekyll and Hyde situation. He does it really gracefully and sensitively. I think those of us that have seen Robert Pattinson in other movies outside of Twilight, because let's be honest, for the casual moviegoer, those films do get quite a lot of hate. But Pattinson genuinely does have a huge range, and he's the kind of actor that can portray 1,000 emotions with just the look in his eyes. And I, for one, have 100% confidence that he's able to do this role justice. Next up, we have an interview with Jeffrey Wright, aka Jim Gordon. Again, not a villain, but seeing as the interview is included in this article, I thought it would be fun to include it in the video. What is Gordon's relationship with Batman? My Gordon is very much partnered with Rob's Batman, and so there is, as Gary Oldman once described it, very much a Watson to the Batman's Holmes in our storytelling. He's still Lieutenant, he's not Commissioner yet, so it gave the character the opportunity to really dip his hands into the muck and be up to his elbows, and be very much in the thick of things. This is the kind of Gordon that I personally like seeing, not one that's a commissioner sending other police officers to do his bidding, but actually being involved with Batman, actually getting his hands, I'm going to say dirty, it's Gotham, and being involved in solving and fighting these crimes. When we meet him, who's the biggest thorn in Gordon's side? The thorn in his side is Gotham, just the larger environment and the issues that the city is facing, and the ways that it's fallen from grace, and the way that that has infected all elements of the society and the institutions within it, including the Gotham Police Department. Again, this is making me very excited. Gotham should be the biggest thorn in Gordon's side, right? Gotham is the problem, and when a Batman story is told right, the city of Gotham is almost its own character. So again, they're going down the right path in my opinion. You recently voiced Batman in a podcast series, and now this. Are you a big fan? Who isn't a big Batman fan? I've been in some pretty big significant film franchises, but this one is on another level. I have to say, I was a fan, yes, very much so. I read the comics here and there, but for me, the 60s series was the thing, and Adam West was my guy. Again, each to their own. I personally love the Adam West 60s Batman show, but for a very different reason. It's something a little different for me, and it is probably my earliest memory of being a Batman fan. I grew up in the 90s, and there were plenty of reruns of that show on TV, so I find it very, very difficult to hate that show. But obviously, I personally prefer the darker Dark Knight. Next, we have an interview with John Turturro, who is playing Carmine Falcone. How did the Batman come your way? Matt Reeves called me up. I've been very aware of Batman since I was a small kid. I was a Zorro fan, and then a Batman fan. With the TV series, I've enjoyed the movies, and then my oldest, Armadeo, works for DC Comics as an editor. Armadeo loved Batman. He pointed me towards the right comics. It's pretty cool to know that an actor playing a role as big as Carmine actually has a son, I'm assuming, that is involved with DC Comics, so he can point him straight to the source and make sure his dad's playing it the right way. How did Falcone's look come about? I told Matt if I could find the right pair of glasses, maybe I could do something with it. Sort of like another version of a mask. I wound up having a really good time working with Matt. He was tremendously collaborative and let me try a lot of interesting things. I personally am a big fan of the look. I know we haven't seen a lot so far, but just from the general images and small snippets of video we've seen, he looks like a crime boss, so I'm happy. Is Falcone old school compared to the Penguin and the Riddler, etc.? There's these people in New York City like Robert Moses. He's built most of New York City. He was one of the most powerful men in America for years. He was corrupt, but he certainly was powerful. That's what I thought of. whatever that can be called. I don't think someone who's old school thinks they're old school. I think they're normally like, well, this is how it is, and this is how I do business. Again, another actor that's basing his performance on historical reality, crime bosses of the past, for example, and I think this just lends itself even more to the Batman being the most realistic take we've had so far on the Caped Crusader. Finally then, we'll end with an interview with Zoe Kravitz, who is playing Catwoman. Did you worry that having voiced Catwoman in the Lego Batman movie would count against you getting this role? No, when they asked me to do that, I thought it was so fun, and I actually forgot about that connection when this whole thing came about. I think it's really funny and interesting that there's some energetic connection between the two of us. How would you describe Selina's fighting style? She's feisty, she's quick, and we really focused on not being able to tell what her next move will be. So the kick, it comes out of nowhere. Thinking about realistically, how could someone of my size take on someone like Batman? It's really the element of mischief and surprise. What was the first version of Catwoman you remember seeing? I think it was Eartha Kitt always really stood out for me, because I was seeing a black woman act that way, in those outfits, with so much power. I can't remember the first time I saw it, but I remember having conversations about her with my father and my grandmother, who's an actress as well. As a black actress, she was breaking a lot of rules. It was very cool to see. Okay, that's pretty much it. There's a ton more information in the Total Film magazine, so if you want to pick it up for yourselves, please do. I didn't want to just sit here and read the entire 18-page article. That would just spoil it for those of you that want to read it. But it is a good article. There's some great images on there, which I'm sure you can find online. But even the cover looks pretty cool. So that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this new little bit of information about the Batman. I promise to bring you every bit of news I could find when I find it, so that's what I'm doing. Again, thank you all for the support you've been giving me over the last few weeks. Please, if you enjoy this content, consider subscribing. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to return to the Batcave for more Bat content. See you guys.